Imagine a $50 commercial router uh, just sitting in a back supply closet, quietly failing on a Tuesday afternoon.
Right, the classic nightmare scenario.
Exactly. And in an instant, because of that one little piece of plastic, a multi-million-dollar supply chain just ceases to exist for 48 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, the warehouse scanners drop offline, the cloud inventory system stops syncing, logistics drivers can't authenticate their delivery routes, and the customer portal just throws a fatal error.
It's total paralysis.
Total. And the wild thing is that isn't some hypothetical disaster scenario. That is the baseline reality of modern business dependency. So, welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are unpacking the fascinating 25-year evolution of technology management, tracking how it went from a really tactile, reactive kind of fix-it job, right, to the absolute strategic core of modern enterprise.
It's a huge pivot.
It really is. And our guide for this deep dive is a great blog post. It's titled Pantheon Perspective, From Bench Tech to Strategic Partner. It was written by Jill, who works in new business development and is actually a co-owner of Pantheon Computers.
Which means she's literally lived through this entire industry shift.
Exactly, going right from the tech bench all the way to the executive table. So our mission today is to tear down that old illusion that IT is just a utility you pay for. And we're going to explore why operating without what they call a virtual CIO mindset is, well, essentially playing Russian roulette with your balance sheet.
Yeah, the paradigm has completely inverted. We used to view technology as just a tool that supported the business.
Right.
But today, the technology literally is the business. If you're still treating your digital infrastructure the way you treat, like, your office plumbing, just ignoring it until a pipe bursts, you are operating on borrowed time.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the source material provides this really stark visual anchor that perfectly captures the evolution.
The contrast is great.
Oh, it's so good. On one hand, you have the pure nostalgia of that late 90s tech bench. It's a solitary tech surrounded by open beige computer chassis.
Yes.
Loose RAM sticks everywhere, screwdrivers, tangled cables. It's physical. It's messy.
Very tactile.
Right. The machine is broken, and they are basically performing surgery to fix it. But then you look at the modern equivalent they show. It's this sleek, darkened room. You've got two professionals in business attire sitting at a clean desk.
And they're surrounded by massive glowing dashboards.
Exactly. Monitoring data flow, network health, threat perimeters. It looks like mission control. They aren't holding screwdrivers anymore. They're holding data.
Well, what's fascinating here is that the evolution between those two images wasn't just driven by, better hardware. It was actually driven by the changing nature of consequence.
Consequence. I like that.
Right, because in the era of that messy workbench, a crashed computer was an isolated inconvenience. You lost one machine. Today, a crashed server is a systemic failure. Those professionals looking at the dashboards, they are entirely focused on neutralizing risk before it even materializes.
That'd be proactive.
Exactly. They are tracking the degradation of hardware, projecting capacity limits. They're basically mapping the future because reacting in the present is just too expensive.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
But let's look at the actual trajectory that gets an industry from point A to point B, because the narrative traces a literal 25-year career path, starting right at that physical workbench.
Jill's origin story.
Yeah. Back then, IT was purely transactional. You pulled apart a computer, isolated a bad hard drive, removed a virus, and sent it back to the user.
Right.
There was no strategic roadmap. You're just a mechanic fixing whatever rolled into the shop. But over time, she notes that the role naturally expanded. The focus shifted from individual workstations to server administration.
Which is a huge jump.
Right, and then trying to figure out how those servers talk to each other across complex networks.
And that transition from workstation repair to network administration, that's the crucial inflection point. It's the exact moment you stop looking at individual trees and start managing the forest.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
You start to realize that a network is an ecosystem. A configuration error on a single switch can cascade and create latency across an entire department. So the whole mindset has to shift from fixing broken things to, well, optimizing the flow of information.
And here's a really fascinating detail from her timeline. In the middle of this massive industry acceleration, Jill actually took a multi-year break to be with her kids, which, by the way, she calls her best decision.
I love that she included that.
Right. But she steps entirely away from the daily grind of the tech world. And when she returns to the industry at the end of 2024 to co-own Pantheon Computers, she observes something deeply counterintuitive.
The fundamentals hadn't changed.
Yes. Despite the exponential leap in cloud architecture, remote workforces, automated threat vectors, the core fundamentals were exactly the same.
Because the underlying logic of networking remains incredibly resilient. The TCP/IP protocols that govern how data packets find their destination, the principles of subnetting.
Stuff from 20 years ago.
Exactly. Access control, least privilege, these are still the bedrock of digital communication. The tools layered on top of them have become vastly more sophisticated, but the architectural principles are identical.
Okay, I get the dashboard concept and the ecosystem argument, but let me play the skeptical CFO for you for a second.
Bring it on.
If the fundamental protocols haven't actually changed since the days of beige towers, why can't a modern business survive with just a really smart person and a screwdriver? Like, why are business owners looking at a massive spike in overhead to pay for these mission control dashboards and a team of analysts?
That's a fair question.
Isn't this just the IT industry kind of artificially inflating its value through complex consulting?
That is the exact pushback every mid-market executive brings up. And honestly, it reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of what they're actually paying for.
Okay, how so?
You are not paying for the dashboard. You are paying for the management of dependencies.
Dependencies.
Right. Think about it. 20 years ago, a network was primarily used to share local files and maybe send print jobs down the hall. Today, your customer relationship management software, your inventory logistics, your payroll, even your physical security system.
Yeah, the cameras and door locks.
Exactly.
Right.
All of it relies on active API handshakes across multiple external cloud environments.
So the attack surface and just the sheer number of failure points have multiplied exponentially.
Multiplied and become deeply intertwined.
Yeah.
Look, if a local firewall drops a packet today because some in-house tech forgot to apply an obscure firmware patch, the APIs fail to authenticate. Your cloud inventory stops communicating with your local shipping software, and the whole warehouse just grinds to a halt. A smart tech with a screwdriver cannot fix an API authentication failure between AWS and your local domain controller by taking the computer chassis apart.
Yeah, you can't fix the cloud with a wrench.
Exactly. The complexity has scaled far beyond the capacity of a single human.
So because businesses now fundamentally depend on this infrastructure, literally just for survival, that old wait until it breaks model is incredibly dangerous. This basically necessitates a totally different kind of professional relationship.
It does.
Which introduces Pantheon's concept of IT Advisership. And they explain how, maybe 20 years ago, this level of strategic guidance, like having a virtual CIO, that was exclusively a luxury for massive enterprise organizations.
Oh yeah, Fortune 500 stuff.
Right, and small businesses, city departments, schools, they were left with either a basic IT person just keeping the lights on, or absolutely nobody at all.
Which is terrifying in today's landscape.
It really is. But we need to clarify the terminology here, because I think a lot of listeners might look at their current vendor contracts and just assume they already have this. What is the actual difference between standard managed services and this higher-level IT advisership?
That is a critical distinction.
Because if I'm a business owner and I'm paying a company thousands of dollars a month to manage my tech, I kind of expect them to be doing this strategic thinking.
You would expect that, but operational reality dictates otherwise. Standard managed services, they're really just focused on keeping the lights on.
Okay.
It's patching servers on a Tuesday night, it's maintaining backup schedules, it's running the help desk so when someone locks themselves out of their email, a guy answers the phone and resets the password.
The day-to-day grind.
Right, and that is critical foundational work. You have to have it. But it is entirely operational. It is entirely focused on the present moment.
So it's like treading water. You aren't sinking, but you definitely aren't navigating toward the shore either.
Exactly. IT Advisership operates on a completely different temporal plane.
Okay.
A virtual CIO is not looking at the help desk queue. They are sitting down with the executive team, looking at the business's growth projections for the next 2 years, and mapping the technology required to support that growth without friction.
Wow, that's a totally different mindset.
It is. They're analyzing the depreciation of hardware. They know exactly which server is going to age out of its warranty in 18 months, and they are building that replacement cost into the upcoming fiscal budget.
So the CFO is never surprised by some massive emergency capital request.
Precisely.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. Jill has this standout analogy in the piece. She compares this proactive IT approach to having an accountant or an attorney.
It's a brilliant comparison.
Right, because you don't just hire a lawyer when you're already in trouble. You keep them close because their perspective protects you. You review contracts year-round so you never actually end up in front of a judge.
Exactly. The value isn't in winning the lawsuit. The value is in avoiding it entirely.
And regular sit-downs to track hardware life cycles do the exact same thing for tech. It redefines IT from a break-fix vendor to a totally invested strategic partner.
It's preventative medicine for your business.
But let's look at the true cost of wait and see. Because if the virtual CIO model is the ideal state, what are the actual stakes of sticking to the old ways? The source lays out a pretty harsh reality here.
It's brutal.
They explicitly state that the cost of reacting to technology problems is always higher than the cost of preventing them.
Always. And that is not hyperbole. It is a mathematical certainty in technology management. When you react to a failure, you surrender all of your leverage.
Let's walk the listener through the mechanics of that, because the scenarios Jill outlines, things she's seen hundreds of times, are chilling. Let's take the unbudgeted server upgrade that becomes a massive emergency.
Oh, this happens constantly.
You have a core piece of infrastructure. Say it's 6 years old. No one is tracking its life cycle. No one's monitoring the disk degradation. It just sits in a closet until, predictably, it fails on a Thursday morning.
And suddenly, the entire company goes offline.
Right. So what does that reaction cost look like?
Well, if you had a virtual CIO tracking that life cycle, the replacement would have been budgeted 6 months ago. The new hardware would have been ordered with standard shipping, configured without interrupting the business, and smoothly migrated over a planned weekend.
Right, nice and calm.
Exactly. But instead, because it's an emergency, you are paying exorbitant, expedited shipping fees to get hardware overnight. You're paying emergency, time-and-a-half labor rates to engineers just to rebuild the environment from backups.
And that doesn't even factor in the invisible cost, the bleeding of revenue for every single hour. Your staff cannot access their tools.
Yeah.
You are paying payroll for 50 employees to literally just sit at their desks and stare at blank screens.
The cheap route of waiting for it to break instantly transforms into the most catastrophic line item of your entire quarter. You pay a massive premium for the chaos.
Which naturally leads us to an even darker scenario. Because a failing server at least gives you some operational friction, right? It slows down, it crashes, it forces a reboot, you know what's happening. But the second scenario outlined is the overlooked security gap.
Yes.
And the terrifying thing about a modern network vulnerability is that it makes absolutely no noise. It's completely silent.
And this raises a really important point about the anatomy of a modern breach. Threat actors today rarely deploy their payload the moment they penetrate a perimeter. They operate on this principle of dwell time.
Dwell time.
Yeah. An employee clicks a sophisticated phishing link, or maybe an outdated firewall firmware gets exploited, and the attacker gains a foothold. But they don't strike immediately. They might sit inside that network for 3, 4, maybe even 6 months.
Just silently mapping the architecture.
Precisely. They are watching the data flows. They're identifying exactly where the most sensitive intellectual property is stored. They're mapping the backup servers, this is crucial, so they can encrypt your safety net before they encrypt the primary data.
Oh, that is sinister.
It is. And without a strategic partner actively hunting for those vulnerabilities, enforcing zero-trust architecture, performing penetration tests, you are operating under the illusion of security right up until the moment the ransomware screen locks every terminal in the building.
So that old whack-a-mole approach to IT, only swinging the mallet when a problem explicitly pops its head up, it's fundamentally obsolete. By the time the ransomware mole pops up, the game is already over.
100%. The virtual CIO model is essentially going into the arcade machine's programming and unplugging the moles before the game even begins.
And the cost of that breach goes so far beyond just the ransom demand, doesn't it?
Oh, the ransom is just the tip of the iceberg. You have forensic investigation costs, legal liabilities, skyrocketing insurance premiums, and honestly, the unquantifiable destruction of client trust.
Which brings up the third landmine Jill mentions, compliance. Because we are living in an era where regulatory frameworks are tightening rapidly. APEA in healthcare, SOC 2 for service providers, CMMC for defense contractors.
And these aren't just polite suggestions anymore.
No, they are rigid frameworks with massive financial penalties if you fail an audit.
And this is where the virtualization of the CIO role truly justifies its overhead. An internal IT guy in the basement patching servers does not have the bandwidth or the specialized expertise to map a company's data flow against a 100-point compliance matrix.
Right.
If a mid-market firm wants to land a contract with a massive enterprise-level client, that client is going to demand a SOC 2 audit. If you cannot prove with documentation and strategic tracking exactly how your data is encrypted at rest and in transit, you fail the audit. You lose the contract.
So a lack of strategic IT literally caps your revenue potential.
It becomes a hard ceiling on your growth.
It feels like they're literally mapping the future to avoid landmines. But for the listener trying to grasp this, who maybe works in an organization where everything is always an emergency, how difficult is it to shift a culture from one that constantly puts out fires to one that practices fire prevention? Because it feels like it requires business owners to completely rewire how they view technology spending.
It is an immense cultural challenge because it requires abandoning the siloed IT approach. You can no longer treat IT as this separate department that you only talk to when you need a new laptop.
Right.
It means elevating technology to the executive table. A virtual CIO has to be integrated into the business strategy from day one. Say the business plans to acquire a smaller competitor in a year. The virtual CIO needs to know that today so they can begin auditing the target company's infrastructure and budgeting those integration costs.
So bringing this all together, what are the key takeaways for the listener? We've seen that technology management has completely evolved from isolated bench repairs to comprehensive life cycle and budget mapping. True security and true efficiency, they don't come from a quick fix. They come from strategic partnership and a proactive timeline.
I think the core lesson from this 25-year timeline is that hope is simply not a viable corporate strategy.
Right.
You cannot hope your server lasts another fiscal year. You cannot hope your firewall deflects an automated attack. You must architect the certainty yourself.
Architecting certainty. I love that. And that is exactly where Jill is heading next in her writing. She teases that in her next post, now that this strategic foundation is laid, she's going to be diving into advanced security, framing it as the absolute bedrock of everything Pantheon does. Because a beautiful 2-year roadmap is worthless if the foundation is compromised.
I really look forward to analyzing the mechanics of that security architecture when they publish it. Understanding how they operationalize that vision will be highly instructive.
Same here. But before we wrap up today, I want to pivot this concept entirely away from corporate servers and executive budgets for a second. Let's look at your own life as the listener. Look at your professional workflows, the personal tools you rely on, or even your career trajectory. Jill realized that waiting for things to break is the most expensive way to operate. So where are you still playing the bench tech? Where are you waiting for something to break, a process, a tool, a relationship, before you pay attention to it?
It's a great question.
What would it look like if you acted as your own virtual CIO today and actually mapped out your next 2 years with intentional strategic foresight? Are you just waiting for the emergency, or are you building the dashboard? Something to think about. Keep navigating, keep building, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.